Patrick, thank you for joining us. Of course, Patrick McEnroe, former professional tennis player, longtime tennis commentator. We'll get into the Australian Open, which is coming up in just a bit, but I really want to talk about three different major topics. One, the state of tennis today, professional tennis today. Two, the state of professional tennis broadcasting today. And then three, the professionalism of tennis, and sort of a little bit about your life and how you became a professional player. And I know you've spent times running player development before, and I'm curious how sort of today's professionalism of a tennis player relates to when you were going through, and sort of your thoughts on the professionalism of youth tennis players today. But let's start with the first one, which is, how would you say the state of American tennis is today relative to how the state of American tennis has been over the past 40 or 50 years compared to all of the other major American sports?
Well, you threw me a little curveball right there, right off the top, and I appreciate that. That's because first you said the state of tennis overall, then you shifted to American tennis.
Yes,
so I'll
yeah.
give you both. I think the state of tennis is as healthy as it's ever been. I mean, globally. You know, every time I go to one of these events, I'm getting ready, as you said, to go down to Australia. It gets bigger. There's more fans attending. I even saw that the qualifying is going on now, and they had 35,000 people for the day two of the qualifying. So all the majors are getting bigger and better. The Masters events, which are the events just below the majors, are more and more successful. So globally, the sport is very healthy. Now, American tennis, this question I get asked all the time, what's wrong with American tennis, is usually how it's phrased, because especially on the men's side, why can't we win majors is basically the bottom line, meaning we American players. And the reason is because, well, we had Federer, Nadal, Djokovic that dominated for 20 years. Djokovic is still there. And we thought, okay, there's a window coming where there's going to be some opportunities, right, for some other players, not just Americans, but other Europeans, South Americans, et cetera. And then now we've got Carlos Alcaraz and Yannick Sinner, both European, who have won the last 8 majors between the two of them. So they've actually distanced themselves at a level competitively, I think even more so than Federer, Nadal, Djokovic did, that it's just very hard for players other than them at the moment to win these big tournaments on the men's side. On the ladies' side, the women's side, you know, we as Americans have 4 American women in the top 10 in the world right now. Coco Gauff, Amanda Anisimova. Gauff has already won 2 majors. So there's a little more opportunity for women to win majors that are American. But for the men, we've got a lot of really good players like Taylor Fritz, Ben Shelton, Tommy Paul, Francis Tiafoe. But whether they can break through and win majors, you know, my brother and Connors were there back in the 70s and the 80s. You had Sampras and Agassi and Jim Courier. And Andy Roddick is now the last American man to win a major. That was all the way back in 2003 at the U.S. Open.
So I have two thoughts on the men's side, which is it healthy for the sport to go from one era of dominance to another where there's only 2 guys, theoretically every tournament, winning? How long do you think that'll stick around for? Because both Alcaraz and Sinner are quite young. You could see this lasting for years and years and years. And you know, what strikes me in my mind, it's funny, I was thinking about this as I was driving to work today. All of these sports are entertainment driven. They're all character driven. And you know, it's like, think about professional wrestling. There's always guys that are at the top, that are your champion wrestlers. But it's never just 2, because 2 is too boring. And so what does that mean for the future of men's tennis if it is only these 2 guys for years to come?
I think it's problematic. I agree with you. And I think when you had the big 3, you also had Andy Murray, who won, you know, multiple majors. You had Stan Wawrinka, you had Juan Martín del Potro, you had other guys, Cilic, for example, that could get in there here and there. And 3 is different than 2. You're right. So you know, that's what I'm hoping. I mean, I love these 2 young guys. They're phenoms. I mean, they could break all the records between the 2 of them, and they just keep getting better, even though they're so young. and they're very dominant at the moment. But, I look at a young guy, the kid from Brazil, João Fonseca. There's a couple guys from Eastern Europe, Menchik and Mahach, some young guys. There's some young Americans, too, that are in the mix, that could get in the mix. But at the moment, it's a two-horse race. And I think that is problematic because, people do say to me, nobody can beat these guys except each other. There's no one else that can beat them. So it's kind of up to the players that are there now. And there may be some players that are 15, 16, 17, that are watching this. This is usually how tennis goes, right? The younger generation sees what the pros are doing. They start to train. That's what we train our kids at our tennis academy to try to do, to improve their games and to improve the overall level. But at the moment, it's a two-horse race in men's tennis.
Why has this happened in men's tennis, where we went from one dominant era of 4 players, broadly speaking, if you include Murray, to an era where there's just 2 guys who are better than everyone else? Is it luck? Is it something about the sport?
I think it's luck, to be honest. I think the players that master the technology, like the speed of the game, has become so incredible. And now you've got 2 guys that are just phenomenal athletes that are also phenomenal tennis players. Back in my day when I came onto the tour, I was a great tennis player. I mean, not great. I was a very good tennis player, but I wasn't a great athlete. I wasn't my brother was lightning fast, for example. Bjorn Borg, lightning fast. And nowadays you kind of have to have the whole package to be at the top, because, Taylor Fritz is a phenomenal tennis player, but I wouldn't say he's a phenomenal athlete, like the quick twitch muscle. Everything he does technically as a player is incredible. But can someone like that compete with a Sinner and Alcaraz in best of 5 if they don't have lightning speed? The answer is probably not. And I think that's what we're seeing. So now there are other guys that are great athletes. So it's going to be up to them to sort of catch up to these 2 guys. But I think for the most part, it's basically luck that they happen at the same time.
You were the Davis Cup captain for 10 years. I think that was the longest tenure any American has been Davis Cup captain for. You guys won as a team. Americans won in 2007. You mentioned Andy Roddick before. He was a part of that team. Haven't won since. And I must say, as a fan of tennis, and also a fan of broader sports, you don't hear much about Davis Cup anymore in the United States. It is sort of, there was a time when you and your brother really pushed it hard on broadcasts and public appearances. What is your thought about the current state of Davis Cup, and can you ever see that coming back as a major event in the United States?
They tried to restructure it a number of years ago, and I think it's been pretty much a disaster, from a public relations standpoint. And people realize that team events in tennis are good. People like that, men and women. They just had a thing called the United Cup in Australia. Huge crowds come out to watch it, 1 male, 1 female from each country. So they've started to do more team-like events in tennis. So what does that mean? Well, it's kind of squeezed in the Davis Cup. My brother and I were part of the Laver Cup for the last, 8, 9 years, which, is a group of Europeans and then the rest of the world, kind of, a Ryder Cup type of setup. So because there's more of them in the calendar, it's kind of pushed Davis Cup to the side a little bit, where the players, they play sometimes, but it's not like I have to play Davis Cup every year. If you're Sinner, even Sinner didn't play this year, and he led Italy to the Davis Cup for a couple of years. Alcaraz pulled out because of an injury. So that's happening more and more. Also, the fact that the Olympics tennis has become an Olympic sport in the last 20 years. I think that's made Davis Cup a little less relevant. So it could get back. I would like to see it not be every year, because I think that having it every year is part of the problem. Now, the ITF, the International Tennis Federation, runs it. They oversee it. So they get a lot of their financial stability from running the Davis Cup, because that's their big ticket item. So you can't really blame them for trying to, continue to have it every year, because that's what funds a lot of the things that they do globally in tennis.
One other event I wanted to ask you about, which is sort of a sideline event to the majors that just happened, is this sort of like modern battle of the sexes match that took place a few weeks ago between Nick Kyrgios and Sabalenka. Just curious to hear what your thoughts were on that event. It has drawn quite a bit of criticism.
My thoughts are limited on it because I just really don't care. I think people overreacted to it, that it was such a horrendous thing for women's tennis. It was an exhibition. It was meant to be an exhibition. Both players have the same management company, so they obviously put it together so that the two of them could play. I don't care that the best 17-year-old boy could beat Sabalenka, but that to me it doesn't matter. I love women's tennis. Women's tennis has grown exponentially, partly because men and women play alongside each other in all the big events. So I think that's one of the great things about our sport, that men and women get essentially paid the same at the majors. Now, they don't get paid the same on their own tours because the men's tour, the ATP tour, still creates more revenue, week in, week out than the women's tour. That's just a reality. But when the men and women play together, the sport is better. But to play against each other, just, nobody cares about that. And, I think the criticism on both sides was too much. It was an exhibition for fun. They got some attention and just move on. I call it the funny money part of the year in December when, Alcaraz is going around the world. God bless him, can make, $1 million, $2 million per night. And if people come and see it, then more power to them. They're selling tickets and they're having tennis be played somewhere where there normally isn't a tournament.
Yeah, it's funny. This is something, my wife is a big tennis player. The two of us talk about this a lot because you brought it up there that the best 17-year-old boy can probably beat the top #1 women's tennis player. I don't think the public really understands that. And I wonder if that's purposeful to sort of in the nebulous, world, people don't really understand exactly how good men's tennis players are compared to women's tennis players, or frankly, if it doesn't matter, because if you're watching women's tennis, like that sport is enjoyable on its own. So who cares what it is relative to men's tennis?
I mean, it's kind of a fun thing to talk about, I guess, for people that aren't really experts in the sport. Because, when you go watch them play, and, we put these graphics up in our TV coverage all the time. Sabalenka's hit the hardest forehand of the tournament, or Madison Keys is hitting the harder ball than the top men. And that's really irrelevant as far as like how they match up against each other. But that's fine. But I love watching, to me, women tennis players make more money than any other female athletes on the planet. I mean, that's starting to change, which is good for the other sports, women's basketball and, soccer and so on. But women tennis players are still, I think I usually see the list and it's usually 9 of the top 10 or 8 of the top 10 female athletes are tennis players. So I think that's a positive, but it's kind of like fun to talk about. And so for the person who's sort of a more casual viewer of tennis, they could watch two women play and then watch the two men and say, oh, these women could play with the men. But, the spin and the speed is what is the difference. And again, that's just a reality. So it's not probable that a 17-year-old, it's a definite. It's not probable. It's like if you took the women's soccer team that wins the World Cup, for example, or let's say in basketball, let's say the women's basketball team that wins Olympic gold every year. Amazing to watch, right? Phenomenal. What would happen if they played the Duke Blue Devils men's basketball team? What do you think would happen?
I think the Duke team would destroy them, probably.
Right. So it's the
Yes.
same thing in tennis, and that's just a reality. But again, that doesn't
just a
take
physical
anything
reality.
away from,
Exactly.
exactly. It's the same in tennis.
I spoke with Billie Jean King a few months ago. She advocates bringing together the ATP Tour and the WTA Tour. And I have heard you talk a little bit about how there's definitely interest from Saudi Arabia, PIF, in playing more of a role. They have already started to fund a little bit of things on the women's side. On the men's side, they're a sponsor for rankings, but they haven't really taken a big stake in the league yet. Do you think it's only a matter of time before those two tours come together and perhaps it's either strongly backed or owned by Saudi money?
Great question. I don't think that they're ever going to own it. I think they're going to play a bigger part, and there's likely going to be a Masters 1000 event there, which will be men and women combined, which is what's happening in most of the bigger tournaments. I think the ATP Tour, the men's tour, is a little reluctant because of what I said earlier, that basically the men's tour brings in a lot more revenue on a week-to-week basis. Now, over time, right? The majors are the biggest. Like they bring in the most revenue by far, and they've done it partly because men and women playing together. But if you're, working for the men's tour, for example, I could see them saying, well, wait a second, we're still bringing in a lot more money, but the larger view down the road is, well, if we come together, is the sport better? Is it healthier? And I think the argument's probably yes, because when you look at the majors, people buy tickets and they get to see men and women, right? What other sport in the world can you do that, where they can play alongside each other in the same stadium and the same schedule? So I think that benefit probably in the long run would be better for both tours.
I want to talk about sports broadcasting now. Just this week, we have seen ESPN move on from a couple of your long-term colleagues, Brad Gilbert, Pam Shriver, and the BBC has come out and said, look, we want to revamp sports broadcasting to be more innovative and also more modern. Does that worry you at all? I mean, you've been broadcasting this for decades now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky to still have my job. This will actually be my 30th year with ESPN. So I love what I do. I'm lucky to do it. It's like everything else in life, right? And in broadcasting too. The networks want to bring in some, fresh faces. I mean, the people you mentioned, we're going to miss them at ESPN. Pam Shriver, Brad Gilbert, Darren Cahill, who's been a full-time coach now. Renee Stubbs was with us for a number of years as well. They're all great. But ESPN wanted to bring some players that were more recently on the tour, which is understandable. And the clock is ticking for all of us, right? In everything we do, whatever business we're in. So I do think that tennis, just from a production standpoint, we're always trying to figure out how can we make this more exciting for the viewer. It's a little tricky because there's just one court, right? And there's two players for the most part. So we're always trying to figure out different angles, what works better. But for the most part, what makes tennis great to watch on TV is a great matchup and great drama. The quiet of in between points and all that stuff. That's part of the drama of tennis, which you don't get that week in, week out. But when you get a great tennis match and you get something big that's on the line, I think it's pretty dramatic. But there's not that many other ways you can broadcast it other than this is like an epic match. Federer and Nadal, Wimbledon final, McEnroe, Borg, whatever it is. Those are the things that move the needle when it comes to getting more eyeballs to watch tennis.
Yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on this. But full disclosure, I've been a longtime fan of yours and your brothers before I say this, and I think you guys are excellent broadcasters. This was Sally Jenkins, longtime columnist for the Washington Post. I want to read what she wrote this summer. Johnny Mac, your brother, has become an entitled air coiffer, a lapsed past master turned trifler who refuses to work at it. Witness how he tends to butcher the names of anyone not ranked in the top 5. As for his younger brother, Patrick, he burps out banalities with the same offbeat affect as his bro, apparently believing it passes for alert observation. When you read that, what did you think?
Oh, I've always liked Sally Jenkins and respected her. She's been a great columnist for many years. So I thought, well, I guess they're talking about me. They don't usually talk about tennis broadcasting too much in the mainstream media, right? In the Washington Post or New York Times or what have you. So I figured, I made it. And I've always been, what did annoy me about the article is she said I didn't do my homework. And I'm like, maybe you should spend some time with me and what I do on a daily basis. You could say you don't like me and, that I'm spurting out banalities.
Well, here's the time. What do you do on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, I'm following tennis all the time. So, I'm at our tennis academy. I work for the International Tennis Hall of Fame. I'm watching Tennis Channel. I'm reading up on the players. So I'm listening to the way the players pronounce their names. So, there's on the app, you can listen to the player actually pronounce it. Because we go through this, is it Kuznetsova or is it Kuznetsova? So we go back and forth. We all try to agree when we're in the broadcast room, in the green room. Okay, we're going to pronounce her name this way or his name this way, and then you go on the air and you do it another way. And part of what makes John is his personality, and that's part of what makes him him. And he's been doing it for even longer than I have. So whatever Sally Jenkins is, she's entitled to her opinion. The pretty much every network that covers tennis has hired my brother or wants to continue to hire him even now. So there you go.
Yeah, it actually that is a notable thing that both you and your brother kind of hop from network to network covering tennis. That is unusual. Most networks just kind of have their own people. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how that developed?
Well, for the most part, I've only worked for ESPN. When I started out, I worked for CBS because they cover the U.S. Open. But tennis is fractured. Who covers it? So there's not, And when I first worked for the first 25 years, I worked for ESPN. I couldn't work for any other cable network. That was part of my deal. Now, because ESPN doesn't cover as many events, I used to cover all the Masters events, all the majors. Now ESPN only covers the three majors. So therefore, if someone else wants to hire me, they can't sort of contractually stop me from doing that. Now, John has worked for the BBC, worked for Australian TV, worked for TNT and Warner Discovery, which I did last year. So he's the guy that every single network hires him. But I'm extremely happy to have the gig I have. I think I've earned my keep. You mentioned I'm an analyst. I do play-by-play for the most part. I've learned how to host a studio. I've done that. So I think my performance over the years and my versatility speaks for itself as far as how I've been able to improve my situation as a broadcaster.
You mentioned the player development. I want to talk a little bit about the professionalization of tennis, and maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your own experiences becoming a professional tennis player, and we can use that as the jumping off point to sort of my own questions about the modern professionalization. But you obviously have a unique story in that your brother is one of the most famous tennis players of all time. I obviously his upbringing must have influenced your own to some degree in terms of what you were doing. But can you just kind of explain to people how you became a professional player, or at least to the point of I can play at Stanford and compete at that level? Were your parents dead set very early on making the two of you professional players?
A great question. No, they had absolutely no clue about tennis. And the only reason we got into tennis was because my dad made partner at his law firm, and my parents kind of moved up. They started out living in an apartment in Flushing, Queens, and they ended up moving to a kind of a nicer part of Queens, more of a middle-class neighborhood called Douglaston. And Douglaston happened to have a club called the Douglaston Club that had tennis and swimming. So when John was 8, 9 years old, which is, by the way, is pretty old to become a professional tennis player, he picked up tennis. And I did whatever my two older brothers have. Another brother that also, played tennis, didn't play competitively as much as we did, but we played all the sports. We played on the soccer team at school. We played basketball. We played baseball. And it just so happened that, we were really good at tennis, and my brother was, more than really good. And so while we loved all the other sports and we played the other sports, because we were better at tennis, that's what we focused on in the summers. And obviously my parents were very keen on education. They sent us to private school when they even, had trouble affording it when we were kids. And that's why Stanford came in, because it was obviously a great tennis school, but also a great academic school. And we saw that tennis could be a way to get a scholarship and use that to better our education. And then it just so happened that when John graduated from high school, he got to the semifinals at Wimbledon as a qualifier. He was over there just to play the juniors. So that's when he ended up going to Stanford for 1 year because he promised my mom he would go. Because my mom's like, you got to go because education was so important. They already knew he was going to be top 5 in the world, but he still went to Stanford for a year just to experience it. So that's how we got into it.
How did you guys get that good?
It's mostly genetic. I mean, whether you're number 1 in the world, or as my highest rank was 28 in the world. So I say at our tennis academy, at the McEnroe Academy in Randall's Island, New York, we'd love to get the next John McEnroe, but we'll settle for a Patrick McEnroe, like there's someone that can make it on the pro tour, which we haven't quite done yet. So it's very difficult. It's gotten more difficult. To go to your other question, I call it the over-professionalization of youth sports. When I tell parents that my brother and I didn't even play tennis during the week, during the fall, because we played soccer, they look at me like I got 2 heads, because they're playing 5-6 days a week, 4 or 5 hours a day. So the average kid is playing more, burning out at times. A lot of them are homeschooling or doing online school. And if the kid likes it and they're into it, generally tennis players are pretty good students, for whatever reason. Maybe it's the background, maybe it's the, competitiveness. I don't know, exactly what it is. If the kid likes it, then to me, it's worth it. But you do, and I see it in all sports, not just in tennis, where you got to play travel soccer, you got to play travel lacrosse, and so part of it is the economics of the sport has become such that everyone's trying to get your money, because they want you to play more. So you got to be careful, and we encourage the parents at our academy, at least until the kids are 11, 12, 13, to do other things, to play other sports. And if you do have the opportunity to become maybe a professional or D1 college player, then you can start to focus on tennis, a little bit more. But it is tricky, and you got to be careful that you don't overdo it at a young age.
When you were in high school preparing to go to Stanford, though, and obviously your brother started really early, were you going around the country playing tournaments at that stage?
Oh yeah, I would travel all summer and go to the national tournaments. Now kids travel almost like all year on this ITF junior circuit. Back when we were kids, we would play tournaments, twice a month on the weekends. We'd go to New Jersey, we'd go to Long Island, in the New York area. We were able to play in what's called our section, the Eastern section. Now, as you got better, you had to maybe, I used to practice, for example, when I was in high school, I used to go up and practice with the Columbia men's tennis team because I ran out of kids that I could practice with because I got that good. My brother and I used to practice with a guy named Gene Scott, who had been a former professional tennis player and had, access to a couple courts in Manhattan. So we would find people to play with. I would go get up at 6 a.m. and go to a local club in the city, take the subway and play with a guy who used to play on the tour. So that's how we continued to improve our tennis. But we did other things as well. As I said, I played on the soccer team every year through high school. So did my brother. And that was fun for us. And also, I think made us better athletes.
So you hinted at it, but this was sort of a long prelude to what I think is really the $64,000 question about the professionalization of tennis, which is like you said, look, your own academy, you'd settle for a Patrick McEnroe. We started this conversation talking about how there's really like 3 or 4 American men's tennis players that make a very strong living doing this. And yet there are hundreds, if not thousands, of American kids going to these academies, potentially eschewing what I would say is normal education in order to play tennis year-round, supplement it with some education. Does that return on investment make any sense to you?
It does, again, if the kid is in the right frame of mind. We have tons of kids at our tennis academy, for example, that are great kids they're not going to be professional tennis players. They're never going to make money playing tennis, but they're learning a lot of life lessons. As long as they keep up and they're doing well in school, the universities they like that. They want to see that you're focused on something, that you have an activity that you're good at, and if your grades are good enough and you can keep up, your schooling and go to a good university, whether it's Division I or Division III. I think it is worthwhile, but just strictly from the CNBC financial perspective, are you going to make the money back? Probably not. But my daughters dance. They love they're working just as hard at dance as most of these tennis kids are, and they're not looking to be professional dancers, but it's a good activity for them. It's social, it's physical, it's mental. You got to train, and I think tennis, I would look at it the same way.
Last question. What are your Australian Open picks?
I usually like to wait until I get down there to kind of get the feel. It's right now you'd have to lean Sinner just because, he's played his best tennis down there. It's the only one Alcaraz hasn't won. Again, I'd love to see someone else join the party. Medvedev just won one of the tune-up tournaments on hard. He's always been a great hard court player. He kind of tailed off. Ben Shelton's actually now the highest ranked American. He's 1 spot ahead of Taylor Fritz, who's I'm a little concerned about because he's been mentioning some knee issues. So there's a bunch of Americans. I think Fonseca is the guy to watch this year, the young guy. He's only 19. He's the guy who's got the firepower. He looks to be like he's done a lot of fitness work in the off season. So that's a guy that could join the two-man party at some point. whether it's at this Australian Open. It's so hard to go against one of those two guys at the moment. And the women, you've got, 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8 that could win it. Sabalenka will be the favorite. I think Anna Samova wins a major this year. She made 2 finals last year. Wimbledon, where she got the double bagel, but she came back and beat Swiatek at the Open, got to the final again there. I think she's ready to take the next step. Coco Gauff will be in the mix. You got Jessica Pegula. There's a lot of Madison Keys trying to defend the title. So the women is a little bit more open. I wouldn't say wide open, but the men, as we started in this conversation, is still a 2-person race right now.
Patrick, appreciate you joining us. Have fun in Australia.
You got it. Thanks for having me.